Welcome back to our sanctuary for the sleepless, where the night reveals secrets that daylight tries to hide. It's another restless hour somewhere in the world, and you've returned to us, seeking stories that are more gripping than any thriller, more complex than any soap opera, and more shocking than any scandal, because they actually happen. Tonight, we're entering the most forbidden and misunderstood space in Ottoman history, the imperial harem. Forget everything you think you know about veiled women living in luxury. The real story is about the most sophisticated political machine in the empire, where mothers, wives, and concubines wielded more actual power than most viziers, generals, or provincial governors ever dreamed of possessing. But first, let me ask our midnight community. Have you ever been underestimated because of your gender, age, or position? Have you ever had to work behind the scenes to achieve something you couldn't accomplish directly? Share your experiences, because tonight's protagonists, the women of the Ottoman imperial harem, turned invisible influence into unstoppable power. Picture this: February 1648, Topkapi Palace, Constantinople. In the shadowy corridors of the imperial harem, an elderly woman sits in a room lined with silk and gold, dictating letters that will reshape the Ottoman Empire. Her name is Kösem Sultan, and though no history book calls her emperor, she has ruled the Ottoman Empire for over 30 years through 4 different sultans. Tonight, she's planning the assassination of her own son. This isn't palace gossip or historical speculation. Ottoman palace records, diplomatic correspondence, and witness testimonies all confirm the same shocking truth. The most powerful person in the Ottoman Empire, for much of the 17th century, wasn't a sultan, a vizier, or a military commander. It was a woman who supposedly lived in seclusion, who wasn't allowed to be seen by most men, and who officially had no political role whatsoever. Kösem Sultan's story begins like so many others in the Ottoman system, with violence and separation. Born in Greece around 1590, she was captured during an Ottoman raid while still a child, sold in the slave markets of Constantinople, and eventually selected for the imperial harem because of her exceptional beauty and intelligence. But here's where her story diverges from the romantic fantasies that most people associate with harem life. The imperial harem wasn't a pleasure palace filled with lazy concubines competing for the sultan's attention. It was a ruthless political institution where survival depended on intelligence, alliances, and the ability to eliminate threats before they eliminated you. Palace records show that by age 16, Kösem had already mastered the complex hierarchy of harem politics. She understood that beauty alone meant nothing. The harem was filled with beautiful women. What mattered was strategy, information, and the ability to make yourself indispensable to the sultan, while simultaneously building a network of loyalty among other women, palace officials, and even military commanders. When Sultan Ahmed I took Kösem as his favorite consort in 1605, she didn't just accept the privileged position, she transformed it into a platform for unprecedented influence. Ottoman court chronicles describe how she began attending state meetings from behind a curtained alcove, officially invisible but actually directing policy discussions through whispered consultations with the sultan. But Kösem's real genius wasn't in influencing her husband, it was in preparing for his death. She understood that in the Ottoman system, a sultan's favorite could quickly become his successor's victim, unless she could make herself too valuable to eliminate. So while other concubines focused on bearing sons who might become heirs, Kösem focused on building an intelligence network that extended throughout the empire. By 1617, when Sultan Ahmed Sur died suddenly, Kösem had prepared for every possible succession scenario. Her stepson Mustafa became sultan, but palace records show that within months, Kösem had convinced the palace administration, the janissary commanders, and the religious authorities that Mustafa was mentally unfit to rule. In 1618, Mustafa was deposed and Kösem's own 14-year-old son, Osman II, became sultan. Here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Instead of retiring to a comfortable life as the sultan's mother, Kösem used her new position as Valide Sultan to seize actual control of the empire. Palace financial records show that she personally controlled the imperial treasury. Military dispatches reveal that provincial governors reported directly to her rather than to her teenage son. Foreign ambassadors wrote detailed accounts of negotiating with the sultan's mother rather than the sultan himself. When rebels assassinated her son Osman II in 1622, Kösem faced the greatest crisis of her career. The succession was disputed, the treasury was empty, and several powerful factions were planning to eliminate her along with the rest of Osman's supporters. A lesser woman might have fled or accepted a quiet retirement. Instead, Kösem orchestrated one of the most audacious power grabs in Ottoman history. She convinced the palace guard to restore the previously deposed Mustafa I to the throne, but this time as a complete puppet ruler. Palace chronicles describe how Mustafa was so mentally impaired that he couldn't dress himself or remember his own name from day to day, but Kösem presented him to the public as the legitimate sultan, while she made every actual decision of governing. For 4 years, from 1622 to 1626, the Ottoman Empire was ruled by a woman who officially didn't exist in the political system. Foreign diplomats wrote incredulous reports back to their governments describing negotiations where they spoke to an invisible woman behind a screen who commanded absolute authority over an empire spanning 3 continents. But perhaps most remarkably, the empire thrived under her leadership. Treasury records show that she stabilized the finances that had been devastated by previous military campaigns. Provincial reports indicate that she resolved several long-standing administrative problems that male officials had been unable to address. Military chronicles record successful campaigns against Persia and Poland during her regency. When Mustafa I died in 1626, Kösem faced another succession crisis, but by now, she had perfected the art of invisible rule. She placed her youngest son, Murad IV, on the throne, and continued governing through him. Palace records from this period show an extraordinary level of coordination between official policy and Kösem's personal directives, evidence that she wasn't just influencing decisions, but actually making them. The scope of her power during this period was unprecedented in Ottoman history. She personally appointed and dismissed grand viziers, the empire's highest officials. She negotiated directly with foreign ambassadors, making treaties and alliances in the sultan's name. She controlled military appointments, deciding which generals would lead which campaign. Most remarkably, she managed the empire's finances so effectively that she accumulated a personal fortune that rivaled the imperial treasury itself. But power at this level inevitably creates enemies, and by the 1640s, Kösem faced growing opposition from an unexpected source. Her own son, Murad IV, had grown from a compliant teenager into an ambitious adult who wanted to rule in his own right rather than serve as his mother's puppet. The conflict between Kösem and Murad IV reveals the fundamental tensions in the Ottoman system between official authority and actual power. Murad had all the legal and ceremonial authority of a sultan, but Kösem controlled the networks of loyalty and information that made governance possible. Palace records from this period describe a bizarre situation where mother and son were essentially governing parallel empires, each trying to undermine the other's authority while maintaining the fiction of unified rule. When Murad IV died in 1640, possibly poisoned by agents working for his mother, Kösem faced her greatest challenge yet. Her remaining son, Ibrahim, was mentally unstable, the same Ibrahim whose madness we explored in our first episode. But rather than see this as a problem, Kösem saw it as an opportunity for absolute control. For 8 years, from 1640 to 1648, palace records show that Ibrahim was often completely unaware of major policy decisions made in his name. Foreign ambassadors reported that the Sultan seemed confused about basic facts of governance, while his mother displayed complete mastery of complex diplomatic and military situations. But governing through a madman proved more difficult than governing through a child or a puppet. Ibrahim's unpredictable behavior created constant crises that required Kösem's intervention. His expensive obsessions, like his collection of obese concubines, drained the treasury that Kösem had spent decades building. Most dangerously, his public displays of insanity began to undermine the legitimacy of the entire Ottoman system. By 1648, Kösem faced an impossible choice. Ibrahim's continued rule threatened to destroy the empire she had spent her life building and protecting, but removing him would require her to orchestrate the assassination of her own son, a crime that violated every maternal instinct and religious principle she held. Palace records show that Kösem spent months consulting with religious authorities, seeking some theological justification for what she was planning. She met secretly with Janissary commanders, building support for a change of leadership. She negotiated with potential successors, ensuring that Ibrahim's removal wouldn't lead to civil war. On August 8, 1648, Kösem Sultan made the most difficult decision of her remarkable career. She gave her consent to the assassination of Sultan Ibrahim, her own son, whom she had protected and controlled for 8 years. Palace chronicles record that she was present in the palace when Janissary soldiers strangled Ibrahim with a silken cord, and that her last words to him were, "Forgive me, but you have become a danger to our family and our empire." The aftermath of Ibrahim's assassination marked both the pinnacle and the beginning of the end of Kösem's power. She successfully placed her 7-year-old grandson, Mahmud IV, on the throne, and initially continued her pattern of rule through a child sultan. But the trauma of ordering her son's death, combined with the growing sophistication of her political enemies, began to erode her previously unshakable authority. What makes Kösem's story particularly fascinating is how it reveals the gap between official Ottoman institutions and actual governance. The empire's legal and religious systems provided no framework for female political authority. Women weren't supposed to rule, command armies, or negotiate treaties. Yet for over 30 years, the most important political decisions in the empire were made by a woman working entirely outside official channels. Her methods of governance were necessarily different from those of male rule. Where sultans could command through official authority, Kösem had to persuade through personal relationships. Where viziers could issue public decrees, Kösem had to work through intermediaries and proxy. Where generals could lead armies directly, Kösem had to coordinate military campaigns through a complex network of loyal commanders who officially reported to puppet sultans. But in many ways, her indirect methods proved more effective than traditional approaches. Because she worked through relationships rather than force, her policies often had broader support than those imposed by imperial decree. Because she maintained extensive intelligence networks, she often had better information than officials who relied on formal reporting channels. Because she understood the personal motivations of key players throughout the empire, she could anticipate and prevent problems that surprised male administrators. The documentation of Kösem's career comes from multiple sources that historians have used to piece together her remarkable story. Ottoman palace records provide official accounts of her actions and decisions. Foreign diplomatic correspondence offers outside perspectives on her influence and capabilities. Private letters and memoirs, discovered in various archives, reveal the personal costs of her political success. Perhaps most tellingly, Ottoman chronicle writers struggled with how to describe her role in imperial governance. Traditional historical categories had no place for a woman who wielded supreme political authority while officially having no political position at all. Some chroniclers simply ignored her contributions, crediting male figures with decisions she had actually made. Others acknowledged her influence but minimized its significance. Only a few contemporary sources honestly described the extent of her power and the sophistication of her political operation. The broader significance of Kösem's story extends far beyond Ottoman history. She represents a phenomenon that appeared in many traditional societies, where official political systems excluded women, but practical governance required skills and perspectives that transcended gender boundaries. Like Catherine de' Medici in France or Empress Wu in China, Kösem found ways to exercise real authority within systems designed to prevent female leadership. But unlike many other powerful women in history, Kösem's influence wasn't based on exceptional circumstances or temporary crises. She built and maintained a systematic approach to governance that operated parallel to official institutions for over 3 decades. Her success suggests that the Ottoman system, despite